Chapter 6 The Big Man. Murad Budshaw, M.A., Rickshaw Fleet Captain and Land Pirate at your service. Allow me to begin at the outside and move in. Huge, and also massive, enormous and gigantic describes me well. I am very, very rarely called fat. Perhaps you smile, thinking this is because I inspire a certain sense of caution in more modestly proportioned persons. I must most respectfully take issue with you on this matter, and I beg your indulgence as I present a simple proof. What is fat? Fat is a small word which belies its size in the girth of its connotations. Fat implies a certain ungainliness, an inefficiency, a sense of immobility, a lack of industry, an unpleasant, unaesthetic quality. Unmotivated, unloved, unnatural, unusual, uninspired, unhappy, unlikely to go places or to fit, under the ground, with a heart attack at 55. In short, fat somewhat paradoxically involves the lack of many attributes which you must concede are generally held to be good. When the word fat is mentioned, people do not tend to think of the awesomely powerful rhinoceros, the supremely efficient and magnificent sperm whale, the deadly grizzly of North America. They do not say, fat as a well-fed tiger. No, they say fat as a pig, a creature which eats its own feces and has never in our literature been a symbol of dignity. Very well, then. The collective consciousness has assigned to fat a meaning, and as I speak this language, I must accept fat on these terms. Fat is bad. And so, I am certain you will not disagree when I say the word can hardly be considered to apply to me. I am weighty, yes, but I carry my mass wonderfully. I am quick, light on my feet, and graceful. I have poise. Delicacy and elegance characterize my every movement. My fingers are nimble, my hands deft. It is no secret that I dance well and most willingly. Furthermore, I possess those very qualities, the lack of which is assumed by the word fat. Industry, drive, dexterity, cunning. I am the living embodiment of so many unfat qualities that their enumeration would be a project of enormous scope. If A has fundamental characteristics the very absence of which characterize B, it cannot be said with any degree of accuracy, or, may I add, sophistication, that A is B. Thus, I am not fat. Quod erat demonstrandum. But I do stutter, it's true. You pretend not to understand the logic which links this last statement to that which preceded it? Come now. There is no need for such modesty on your part. A stutter, like fatness, is considered a bad thing, a flaw. I simply wish you to understand that I am not perfect and I am aware of my imperfection. I stutter. I stutter. You perhaps have noticed that my mind works at quite an exceptional speed. I hope you share my feelings about modesty. As a child, my mouth struggled to keep pace with my thoughts, but the race was so unequal that my tongue would inevitably stumble like a blind camel with vertigo. It took me many years to realize that the secret to speech lay in speaking slowly, training my trotting tongue not to chase my galloping mind. So I do not stutter obviously or often, but I do stutter. And strange though it may seem, I am proud of my stutter, much as a comely woman is proud of the black lump which on her face is called a beauty mark. But enough small talk. Let me tell you how I met Darashiko Shehzad. My father was a gold jeweler, the son of sons of gold jewelers from time immemorial. He died before I was born in a freakish accident involving a cigarette and the open valve of a balloon vendor's gas cylinder. My mother was of a more modest background and unloved by the members of her husband's family, who, at the time of my father's immolation, had no knowledge of my imminent arrival. We were soon living with her brother, my uncle, who worked for the British Council Library. So it was that I had access to all the books I could want and the opportunity to learn the nuances of English speech from a people who, if nothing else, do one thing excellently: speak English. I received my MA in English 20-some years later and was, of course, unable to find a job. To sum up what followed, I went to see my father's eldest brother, who I had never met, and in a 5-minute interview was given a sum of money, in exchange for a promise never to show my face in his shop again, that I used to purchase a rickshaw. In the short years since then, I acquired 4 more, and am now captain of a squadron of 5 little beauties. My rickshaw fleet specialized, as much as it is possible to do so in my line of business, in servicing the students and faculty of my alma mater. It so happened that on one rainy day an occasional client of mine, the inimitable Professor Julius Superb, brought one of his favorite students into my rickshaw with him. I had made Dr. Superb's acquaintance in my days as a master's candidate at the university, and he always sought me out when he had rickshaw requirements to be met. He introduced me to his student. We shook hands. I felt a strong grip, and the seeds of a partnership in crime were sown. When next Darashiko needed conveyance, he sought me out. Darashiko was an intriguing fellow. Excuse me for speaking of him in the past tense, but that is how I think of him. He was ruggedly handsome, like knows like, as they say, but cold, with a steady gaze and a cruel mouth. A solid boxer with a quick mind. We talked, and I took a liking to him, and he to me, and we became friends. Socially, we moved in somewhat different circles, although I must say his friends were always very respectful. We met for tea and talk on Tuesdays, after which I gave him a ride, gratis, to wherever he was going. Our conversations ran from economics to automotive maintenance, broken noses, and Aretha Franklin. A word about this last. A foreign tourist once left a cassette in the back of my rickshaw, and when I took it home and played it, I discovered the Queen of Soul. Life was never the same. In the past, when people said America has never given us anything, I used to agree. Now I say, yes, but America has given us Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. And they look at me strangely. I never explain any further. One cannot explain Aretha Franklin. Either you are enlightened or you are not. That is how I view the matter. With the arrival of yellow cabs in Lahore, the rickshaw business took a bad turn. Profits became increasingly slim, and to say competition was fierce is an understatement of unusual proportions. Business is a tough business, as they say, and I am fairly handy when it comes to mixing it up. In my post-MA years, I have been shot at 3 times, hit twice, stomach and thigh, and was unfortunately once obliged to kill a man with a wrench. I took to carrying a gun quite some time ago, and it was but a short step from protecting my own on the high seas of Lahore streets to realizing that piracy was the wave of the future. The marauding yellow cabs had devastated the rickshaw industry. So I conducted a little redistribution of wealth on my own. Robbing yellow cab drivers as they slept put my finances back in the black. But this didn't last. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, as they say, and I was flattered to the point where yellow cab drivers were forced to take precautions, parking to sleep in places that were extremely inconvenient from my point of view, carrying less money, and so on. Pickings became slim, and profits dropped off. Around this time, Darashiko was in rather difficult straits himself. He was in debt, had no job, and was saddled with the heaviest weight of pride and self-delusion I have ever seen one person attempt to carry. I trusted him, knew he was bright, ruthless, capable, and that he could tolerate my sense of humor. And so it was that I enlisted him in my plan to rob boutiques, and together we formed a duo that would strike fear into the hearts of purveyors of fashionable clothing everywhere. It was the summer of great rumblings in the belly of the earth, of atomic flatulence and geopolitical indigestion, consequences of the consumption of sectarian chickpeas by our famished and increasingly incontinent subcontinent. Clenched beneath the tightened sphincters of test sites and silos, the pressure of superheated gases was registering in spasms on the Richter scale. Lahore was uneasy, and Imodium in short supply. The perfect time, I thought, for my plan. Allow me at this point the luxury of a minor digression. Although I proudly admit to being a robber, attaching as I do a certain prestige to my calling, I must make it quite clear, so clear that there is no room for doubt that I am not a murderer. And while it is true that outlaws of both departments are schooled by the faculty of lawlessness, it is equally true that they are separated by a moral chasm as vast as the difference in syllabi which divides BA candidates from those pursuing a BSc. You see, it is my passionately held belief that the right to possess property is at best a contingent one. When disparities become too great, a superior right, that to life, outweighs the right to property. Ergo, the very poor have the right to steal from the very rich. Indeed, I would go so far as to say that the poor have a duty to do so, for history has shown that the inaction of the working classes perpetuates their subjugation. However, because I believe in the primacy of the right to life, I also believe that killing is wrong unless done in self-defense. Although many of my more frivolous friends and acquaintances accuse me of dieting to reduce my weight, the truth of the matter is that I do not eat meat because I am so strongly opposed to killing, and because my sense of compassion is so fat, here defined as grand, expansive, and all-encompassing, that it extends to species beyond our own. The professional murderers I have known tend to disagree. Their arguments run as follows. Murad, old chum, they say, your moral structures are but feeble attempts to come to terms with the reality of killing, and excuse us for saying so, but you really do miss your mark. When a bird takes wing, and you bring your gun to your shoulder and track it and pull and send bits of metal hurtling through the air, ripping through its little feathered body, thereby causing it sufficient physical trauma to begin a process of cessation of vital bodily functions, what do you have? A moral issue? Sport? An illustration of the essential brutality of the universe and the simultaneous meaning and meaninglessness of existence? Of course not. You have a tasty morsel waiting to be seasoned and served with carrots. What once was a free creature which happily flitted about, cheating on his mate and slurping worms out of the soft ground with a flick of its head, as if to say, "Ah, this is the life," is now something stuck between your teeth in such a manner that the toothpick you use to pry it loose leaves your gums feeling just a little bit raw in that deliciously painful but pleasurable way which reminds you of days long since gone when you spent hours twisting at your loosening milk teeth. But you can always justify killing animals on the grounds that you want to eat them, or wear them, or that they smell bad, look funny, bother you, threaten you, and have the bad luck of being in your way. What about killing humans? Well, aside from a few die-hard individualists on the fringe, the general consensus among people these days seems to be that eating and wearing other people is just not on. Wearing a suit which costs as much as a farmer will make in his lifetime is acceptable, but actually putting his eyeballs on a string and letting them dangle above tastefully exposed cleavage is bad form. That said, killing somebody because of the other reasons we mentioned above, smell, looks, bother, threat, or bad luck, is quite acceptable. You want deodorants. You know that 1 in 6.87 million will die from a violent allergic reaction. You shrug and churn the stuff out, and some poor fellow suffers a pain in the armpit beyond imagining and dies. And that's that. Acceptable. You drive cars, knowing eventually you will probably kill somebody or be killed, but hurry up, I don't want to be late for my threading, and you're off. No regrets. Or someone who has never been to your farm and seen the cute dimples your youngest daughter is already showing when she smiles, decides a line on a piece of paper should be a little to the left, and in the name of God and all that's right, to war, boys, kill, kill, kill. Yours not to reason why, but damn it hurts when a landmine blows off your leg. So, Murad, old chum, people kill people all the time, and usually with the barest minimum of fuss. You really must keep a sense of humor about it all. There is no moral issue here. Better to laugh at what you do not understand than to take it seriously and end up giggling hysterically in a padded cell off Jail Road. Now, I concede that the murderers do have a point, but I was brought up by my mother to have a strong sense of wrong and right, and in the end I can only say, quite feebly I admit, placing so little value on human life is wrong. As for myself, I had no choice. The first and only time I killed a man, it was either him or me, and even so the memory of it saddens me immensely. Let me elaborate. I was, why deny it, something of a celebrity in the transportation industry in those days. The wave of yellow cab robberies by rickshaw drivers had crested, and the sense of empowerment which coursed through my fellow drivers of three-wheeled vehicles was electric. It was widely and correctly believed that I was the originator of the idea that the rickshaw's salvation lay in erecting a little barrier to the entry of the yellow cab in our market. Entry barriers are common to all industries, and the spree of robberies of drivers of four-wheeled entrance by drivers of the established three-wheeled holders of market share was simply an example of laissez-faire market economics, as I am sure the good Dr. Superb would tell you. Naturally, the yellow cab drivers had a different point of view. I was an infamous figure of almost mythical proportions to them, a red beard or red baron. Indeed, my rickshaw sported a little red pennant from her rear mast, a radio antenna, and every second robbery was linked to me in some way. A bounty of 10,000 rupees was placed on my head, soon up to 50,000, and from there to 2 lakhs. At least 3 men were killed by bounty hunters and irate yellow cab drivers in cases of mistaken identity. And I wasn't always so lucky. 2 bullets found me out in my hiding places, as I mentioned earlier, and I submit that I shed more than my share of blood. Eventually, after heavy casualties on both sides, a truce was agreed to, and rickshaw drivers and yellow cab drivers joined one another in putting an end to the cycle of robbery and reprisal. By this point, most of the robbing was being done by professional thugs who had nothing to do with either side but simply saw a good opportunity and did not discriminate between the types of vehicles they robbed. So, both 3- and 4-wheel transporters banded together against this common threat. The bounty on my head was withdrawn, and I came out of hiding a hero to rickshaw drivers and a feared but respected former adversary to yellow cab men. All sorts of rumors were circulating, that I had killed 6 men with my bare hands and eaten their livers, that I could shoot the cap off a bottle of Pacola at 20 paces, that I had once caught a bullet in my teeth and spat it away unharmed. Truth be told, I had never killed anyone, was a fair shot at best, and had teeth so weak I avoided eating sugarcane. But I encouraged the rumors because they deterred would-be aggressors and, to be frank, flattered my ego. Now, I was strutting about proudly in those days, and it goes without saying I should have been more careful. Some lad got it into his head that I had killed his father, a yellow cab driver, and he swore to himself that truce or no truce, he would get revenge. The day before it happened, my sources later told me, he was heard boasting that he would not only kill the great Murad Badshah, but would humiliate me besides, and he came after me with his father's gun. There are 3 lessons to be learned from what followed, aside from my general point about death and killing. The first is that the gun of the father is always the undoing of the son. The second is that it is never wise to call someone something which he is not. And the third is that a man's weaknesses can at times be his greatest strength. Gun in hand, the boy arrived at the little depot where I maintain my rickshaws. I was in the small, dimly lit back workroom, tinkering about with a broken-down engine and holding a fancy Japanese wrench given me by a friend who retired from the rickshaw business when things first began to get rough. Not because he was afraid, but because his wife said he was losing his hearing driving a noisy rickshaw all day and ought to be working a register in her brother's store instead. A few children were playing in the street outside, and our would-be murderer, seeing this audience and rising to the role he fully expected to play, cried out theatrically as he entered my depot, "Your time is up, fat man." If he had been silent, I might well have breathed my last that day. Instead, I surged to my feet and would have roared, "What?" obscenities, "said that?" But, as so often happens in moments of intense excitement, my stutter locked onto my voice like a fearful lover and prevented me from uttering a sound. I was growing red, my mouth working desperately, when the boy strode purposefully into the workroom with a glint in his eye and the tip of his tongue between his lips. In the dimness, he did not see me beside the door, but I saw his gun, and without thinking, I swung my wrench in a mighty blow that caught him at the back of the head, where the spine meets the skull, and with a sound like stepping on a soft-shelled turtle, his life was over. I have many regrets about that day. Perhaps I could have disarmed him. Perhaps I could have struck him with less force. But life seeks to preserve itself, and I acted as any man who wants to live would have acted. I derived no pleasure from it, and of all the stories you may hear of the men who have died at my hands, only this one is true, and my career as a robber would have been more illustrious were it not. Perhaps you will now better understand why I, an infamous criminal, was so horrified by the events of that ill-fated robbery when my friend and colleague Darashiko revealed his capacity for cold-blooded murder. It was a dark and stormy night. Do you smile at this introduction? Allow me to submit, for your consideration, the saying that tales with unoriginal beginnings are those most likely to surprise. So, the night was dark and stormy. Lightning flickered above the city. A crescent moon sneered through a gap in the clouds. The boutique huddled against the storm, a tiny island of light on an unlit street. I wore red, the darkest crimson, a color that blends into black in the dark and flatters my figure by day. My kurta fluttered behind me in the breeze, and a concealed revolver itched where it pressed against my hairy belly. Darashiko was inside, for all the world a tastefully dressed patron of the shop, but he carried death in his undershorts and hunger in his heart. I had done all this before, but the thrill, the excitement, the electricity of anticipation never goes. Yes, armed robbery is like public speaking. Both offer a brief period in the limelight, the risk of public humiliation, the opportunity for crowd control. And in both, what you wear is an often ignored but vitally important factor. The signal I awaited was simple. When Darashiko placed his pistol against the head of the guard standing just inside the entrance of the shop, clearly visible through the window display, I was to come in and fleece the place. The signal was given, and I walked in. If you learn nothing else about violent conflict, learn this. Never rush. Take your time, evaluate the situation, then act. When you have multiple tasks to perform, proceed sequentially, or you will make a mess of them all. Think of it as being assigned to read a long, convoluted poem, if that helps you. My tasks at this stage were to enter, control the crowd, rob them, and leave. The shop guard, a rather sweet fellow with a shotgun and a leather bandolier of cartridges, seemed almost ready to cry by the time I entered, walking purposefully but without undue haste. From my long years in the service profession, I have learned both that the customer is always right and that if he steps far enough out of line, threatening him with execution-style murder is a valid although rarely exercisable option. I am told my smile and manner succeeded in conveying this duality of knowledge, and so it is easy for me to maintain the utmost respect while inspiring terror of bowel-moving proportions. With a cheery, "If you please," I proceeded to lighten the burden of wealth that bore down so heavily upon this establishment's clientele. My revolver gleamed with the sweat it had accumulated while pressed against my skin, and it was slippery in my hand. I looked about me as I proceeded, and so I saw the vacant look in Darashiko's eyes as he stood with one foot on the guard, who was by now lying flat on the floor. It happened when I turned my back on him. I was encouraging an elderly lady to help her husband remove a lovely watch with a complicated clasp when I heard a sound behind me, the sound of feet moving quickly, and I whirled just in time to see Darashiko raise his gun. The moment is frozen in my memory. The blank faces above their expensive outfits, the colorful clothing on shiny metal racks, the motionless, impossibly slender mannequins, the gasping inhalation that preceded the woman's scream, the change in pressure as the door of an air-conditioned space is opened, Darashiko's left hand flashing up to steady his aim, and then the scream. Shrill, a sound that raises hackles. And finally, so long awaited that its coming was a shock, the explosion of the gunshot. And Darashiko changed before my eyes. It was unsettling, even for me, a man not easily unsettled. I had forgotten how much it affected me. I hope you will not mind if I now take my leave.